The night Shanghai forgot how to sleep, two lights burned in different corners of the city. One glowed from a rehearsal studio with fogged mirrors and the echo of footsteps hitting wood in perfect rhythm. The other flickered softly in a quiet apartment where a desk lamp illuminated scattered scripts, handwritten notes, and a heart that refused to rest. Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan. Two names, once spoken together in a single breath. Two paths now stretching in opposite directions, yet somehow casting the same shadow on the world. The city outside didn't know it, but history was unfolding again, just not the way anyone expected. Years ago, before the applause grew heavy and fame learned how to wound, their worlds collided like fate had been impatient. The first time Wang Yibo noticed Xiao Zhan, it wasn't on camera. It was in the silence between takes. Xiao Zhan sat on the edge of a set staircase, script resting loosely in his hands, eyes distant, not lost, but searching. As if he were already living 10 scenes ahead, feeling emotions not yet written. Yibo, leaning against a pillar, helmet tucked under his arm, watched without realizing he was watching. There was something unsettling about Xiao Zhan's stillness. Not weak, not fragile, intentional, like a candle refusing to flicker even in the wind. "Why do you stare like that?" Xiao Zhan asked suddenly, without looking up. Yibo blinked. "I wasn't staring." A pause, then a quiet laugh. "You were," Xiao Zhan said, finally meeting his gaze. "But it's okay. People usually do." That was how it began. Not with fireworks, but with recognition. They became a rhythm. Between camera setups and long nights, they learned each other in fragments. Shared snacks, half-finished conversations, laughter stolen between exhaustion. The world saw chemistry. They felt something deeper, alignment. But alignment doesn't mean permanence. As the series ended, applause roared like thunder, and suddenly their names weren't just names anymore. They were brands, headlines, expectations. And expectations are heavy things. The turning point didn't come loudly. It arrived in whispers. A canceled event here. A silent schedule change there. Eyes watching too closely. Words twisted until they cut. One evening, long after the lights went out, they stood backstage at an awards ceremony they both attended, but not together. The air felt different. Thick. Fragile. "You okay?" Xiao Zhan asked, voice low. Yibo nodded, hands in pockets. "Yeah." But Xiao Zhan had always been able to hear what wasn't said. "We don't have to pretend," he said softly. Yibo looked at him then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. They both knew. This wasn't just a pause. This was a fork in the road. Wang Yibo chose motion. He threw himself into speed, into danger, into disciplines that demanded silence. Racing tracks where thoughts disappeared at 300 kilometers per hour. Dance studios where pain was the only language that made sense. He learned how to let the world scream while he stayed quiet. On stage, his movements became sharper, more precise, like he was carving space itself. Off stage, he became harder to read. People called it cool. They didn't see the loneliness inside the discipline. Late nights found him alone in empty studios, replaying old recordings, not to relive them, but to understand where things changed. "Forward," he whispered to himself once, breath fogging the mirror. "Always forward." And so he shone, not warm like the sun, but bright like steel catching light. Xiao Zhan chose stillness. He chose depth. While the noise outside tried to define him, he turned inward, refining his craft like a sculptor alone with stone. Every role he accepted carried weight. Every line he spoke felt lived in, earned. He learned how to stand in silence and let emotions speak louder than words. In one drama, a single tear down his cheek broke millions of hearts. In another, a smile held back felt more powerful than a confession. But the world wasn't gentle. He endured storms that would have broken lesser souls. Criticism sharpened into cruelty. Praise came with conditions. There were nights he sat by his window, city lights blurred by rain, wondering if being true to himself was worth the cost. Then he remembered something Yibo once said, half joking, half serious. "If you're gonna fall, fall forward. Don't let them push you backward." Xiao Zhan smiled through the ache. And he shone. Not sharp, but steady. Like a lighthouse refusing to go dark. Time passed. The industry changed. Fans grew up. Stories evolved. But something curious happened. Even apart, their impact echoed. At international events, journalists asked about the other without meaning to. Algorithms paired their names like fate hadn't finished writing yet. Fans saw patterns, parallel wins, mirrored struggles, shared anniversaries. Different journeys, same gravity. Years later, fate tested its patience again. A charity gala. One night. One shared space. They hadn't spoken in a long time, not because of bitterness, but because some silences grow roots. Iba arrived first, dressed in black, posture calm, eyes alert. When Xiaozhan entered, the room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, like the air had learned a new note. Their eyes met across the crowd. No surprise, no shock, just recognition, older now, heavier, wiser. They didn't rush. They didn't hide. Eventually, they stood beside the same display, pretending to read the same plaque. "It's been a while," Xiaozhan said. Iba nodded. "You look grounded." Xiaozhan smiled. "You look fast." A beat. Then laughter. Soft, unguarded, real. For the first time in years, nothing hurt. They talked like people who had lived entire lives since they last spoke. No apologies. No explanations. Just truth. "I used to think shining alone meant being lonely," Iba admitted, gaze fixed ahead. Xiaozhan shook his head. "No. It means you learned how to generate your own light." They stood there, two stars no longer orbiting the same sky, but still part of the same universe. When they finally parted that night, it wasn't with regret. It was with peace. The world still debates. What could have been? What should have been? But the truth is quieter and stronger. Some stories aren't about staying together. They're about impact. Wang Yibo became proof that discipline can turn pain into power. Xiaozhan became proof that gentleness can survive fire. Different journeys, same legacy. And somewhere between the noise and the silence, their light continues to guide people who need it, together or apart. Because some stars don't collide again. They simply shine and change the sky forever. The beginning didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like something that had always been waiting. The first weeks were loud. Lights, cameras, instructions thrown across the set like flying sparks. But somewhere between the chaos, Wang Yibo and Xiaozhan found quiet. Not silence, exactly. More like a pause the world forgot to interrupt. They sat side by side during breaks, scripts resting on their laps, shoulders occasionally brushing without either of them moving away. It was unspoken, effortless, like two melodies finding harmony without rehearsal. Iba learned quickly that Xiaozhan carried emotions the way others carried luggage, carefully, deliberately, always aware of the weight. He noticed how Xiaozhan reread lines not just to remember words, but to feel the spaces between them. How he asked questions about scenes no one else questioned. Xiaozhan, on the other hand, noticed how Iba listened more than he spoke. How his silence wasn't empty, it was loaded, focused. He watched Iba practice movements long after everyone else had left, repeating the same sequence until sweat soaked through his shirt and exhaustion carved shadows under his eyes. "Don't you get tired?" Xiaozhan asked one night, handing him a bottle of water. Iba shrugged. "Tired means I'm still improving." Xiaozhan smiled at that. He always did. As days blurred into nights, their connection deepened in fragments. Shared jokes whispered behind cameras. Late-night convenience store runs. Stolen moments of laughter when a scene went wrong. Once, during a power outage on set, the entire crew froze, confused, restless. But Iba and Xiaozhan sat on the floor, backs against a wall, darkness wrapping around them like a secret. "You scared?" Xiaozhan asked quietly. Iba shook his head. "I like the dark. It doesn't expect anything from you." Xiaozhan thought about that for a long time. Fame crept in like fog. At first, it felt soft, gentle. Compliments, fan letters, growing attention. Their names were spoken more often, together. Always together. Then the fog thickened. Eyes lingered too long. Questions became sharper. Smiles started carrying calculations. Iba felt it first. He noticed how conversations stopped when he entered a room. How managers spoke in lowered voices. How schedules shifted without explanation. Xiaozhan felt it differently. He felt it in the way people watched him smile, as if measuring it. In how kindness began to look suspicious. in how every gesture became a headline waiting to happen. One night, after a long shoot, they stood on a rooftop overlooking the city. Neon lights stretched endlessly below them, a galaxy built by humans. "Do you ever feel like we're standing on glass?" Xiaozhan asked. Iba didn't answer immediately. "Yeah," he said finally, "and everyone's watching to see who cracks first." The distance didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived quietly. A missed meal, a shortened conversation, a text left unread because there was no safe answer. They still worked together, still smiled when cameras rolled, but something fragile had slipped between them, something neither knew how to name without breaking it completely. One evening, Xiaozhan waited in the hallway after rehearsal. Everyone else had left. The lights buzzed softly. Iba came out last, helmet under his arm, expression unreadable. "You're leaving already?" Xiaozhan asked. "Training," Iba replied. There was a pause. Heavy. Loaded. "Be careful," Xiaozhan said. Iba nodded. "You too." They stood there longer than necessary, both aware that something was being lost, not dramatically, but permanently. The day the final scene was filmed, the air felt different. Too quiet. After the director called cut, applause broke out. People hugged, celebrated, moved on. Iba and Xiaozhan stood facing each other, costumes still on, characters clinging to them like ghosts unwilling to leave. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Xiaozhan smiled, the same gentle smile that had once made everything feel easy. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Iba swallowed. Yeah, they hugged. Brief. Careful. And just like that, the moment passed. That night, Iba rode alone. Speed blurred the world until it stopped hurting. The wind screamed louder than his thoughts. He didn't know what he was running from, only that standing still felt impossible. Xiaozhan, miles away, sat by his window, city lights flickering like broken stars. He replayed memories not with regret, but with understanding. Some connections are meant to stay. They're meant to change you. Years later, people would call it destiny. Others would call it loss. But back then, it was just two people learning that sometimes growing apart isn't failure. It's survival. And even as they walked different paths, something invisible remained. An echo, a shared heartbeat, a light that once burned together and now shone separately. Still bright, still real, still unforgettable. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves deep emotional stories, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, cinematic stories like this. Your support means everything. Dizzy.